Let us gather around. Let us gather around. Let us imagine just for a little moment that we are in Readings Carlton and we've made our way to the back of the shop there, and somewhere just between the self-help section and the poetry section, there's a microphone set up, and just behind the microphone, in a nice and neat in a row, are our three speakers. My role would be, at the very first instance, would be to get in front of that microphone and say, welcome to Readings, welcome on behalf of Transit Lounge and Readings and all readers all over the world. My name is Christine Gordon, and I'm the programming manager for Readings, and I am delighted to be able to welcome you here to this event. Now remember, we're all crowded down the back there at that reading shop, surrounded as we are when we look at Ken, by books, by other people that are readers, by people that are filled with imagination. And I reckon we should grab that moment when we look around at those bookshelves and just imagine for a moment that all of us had taken on a bit of a challenge to read a story or know a songline from the First Nations people. I know it's my role as the host here to acknowledge that we're all living on stolen ground, to acknowledge that this land has not been ceded. But I reckon, given that we're all readers, that we need to do something a little more than that. I reckon we all need to make a commitment to read from the First Nations and to listen to our First Nations people so that we can understand who we are and why we are, and our history more eloquently. So at the moment, I'm speaking from the Kulin Nation, and I would like to send my respects to their elders, to the First Nation people, but also I want to take this opportunity on behalf of all of you, wherever you are in Australia, wherever you are in the world, to also send my gratitude to those people, my gratitude for allowing us to be here at all. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers tonight. Now, what you have to imagine is that Michelle and Margaret and Ken have all worked from major newspapers, have all worked at various times together, have all known each other for many years. They're friends. They're here tonight because these three people are friends. Michelle Grattan, you will know, of course, because she was the first female editor of an Australian metropolitan newspaper. Or perhaps you know her because she is the chief political correspondent for The Conversation. Or perhaps you know her because she's the Professor Fellow at the University of Canberra. But perhaps you know her, maybe as I do, through her voice, through hearing her on radio, listening to her on television, and always feeling grateful that we had someone that was so centered and so pragmatic in that role. I'd like to also introduce you to Margaret Simons. Margaret, of course, is an award-winning journalist. She's an academic. She's a freelance journalist. She's the author of many books. She's the honorary principal fellow at the Centre for Advancing Journalism at the University of Melbourne. And remember how we talked about how all of these people are friends, and that's why they're here today, to celebrate Ken's stories of travel. But I want to also say Ken and Michelle and Margaret are great friends of independent booksellers all over Australia. And for that, I'm truly grateful. Michelle, please take the floor. Ask Ken very difficult questions if you don't mind. That's what we're expecting.
No.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction for us all. And what I'll do is ask Ken about his travels for about 15 minutes and then hand over to Meg, who'll take the baton and ask some more questions, and then it'll be a bit of a free-for-all. So Ken, just to begin, give us just an overview of how many countries you went to, where these travels took you, because they were quite remarkable.
Yes, Michelle, I had hoped to end up going to 21 countries in the Caribbean and Central America, This turned out to be too ambitious. I ended up going to 9, plus the American territory of Puerto Rico, and a 3-month layover in Florida.
Pretty good during COVID, 9 out of 21. So what are the particular challenges? I'm sure people are interested and somewhat awed by the whole thought of travelling internationally, even in good times, let alone in dreadful, difficult times. But what are the challenges of travelling in a wheelchair?
Well, I would say that the first of them is I find is to forget that you're in a wheelchair. First of all, obviously I am, and obviously that does create certain difficulties and obstacles exist. But if I thought of myself constantly of myself as a wheelchair user first, I would forget. And not just forget, but fail to get the full enjoyment of the knowledge that I am actually a traveller. So the first thing when I rock up to an airport, having bought my tickets like any other prospective traveller, is to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as it can. I have to go through the same security checks as anybody else. I do go through I don't go through that that machine. I cannot go through that machine that you go through. They open up a gate and let me round. So already, if I'm not trying to think about it, other people will think about the wheelchair aspect for me. I board first and I come off last. That is something that again becomes second nature. And while it's helpful, because as soon as somebody from the airline sees you, they're going to look after you first. It does mean that if somebody, on the rare occasions that somebody's waiting for me at the destination airport, they probably have to wait 10 or 15 minutes longer. And even if nobody's reaching me there, by the time that I get offloaded and my wheelchair is brought to the gate, to the entrance of the aircraft, and I'm brought down to the carousel area, often my baggage is the only baggage still circling, everybody's left. And that's a little anxiety producing.
But you must have to do a lot of preparation before in booking the right places, in making arrangements for transport, right?
I do. In fact, that is one change in a wheelchair. As a wheelchair traveller, I do find that it's more important to ring ahead, or to even to book online ahead, to make sure that there is somewhere that I'm going to be able to lay my head that night.
So you're obviously a very organised person, Ken.
Much more than I was when you first knew me.
So the challenges of COVID for any traveller, let alone one who has to be so organised, must have been just appalling.
Yes. Now, when I left, it was February, and
last year,
February 2020. We didn't know it was going to be a full-scale pandemic. Ruby Princess was front of the of mind, but countries had not begun to shut down yet. That happened a month later. I have been asked, you know, didn't you realise what you were getting into? No, I didn't, although I can be very obstreperous, and even if I had known, maybe I still would have gone if it were physically possible. But yes, I had made, I had no direct contact with COVID or the change that COVID brought to many lives until 2 weeks into Cuba, when I left my room one morning and came out to the courtyard to have breakfast, and there was a nurse in full PPE gear with a clipboard and a thermometer, and I thought, this is different. And everybody who was staying at that guest house had to have their temperature taken twice a day. There were no lockdowns, but that was the point at which I could see that what had been foreign news largely up until that point was going to impact on my daily life, even though I was very, very far from home.
But of course, as time went on, you had these not only COVID tests all the time, it seems, from your book, but also quarantine. Now, people in Melbourne, where you are, of course, they experienced incredible lockdowns and quarantines for those coming in, and lockdowns for residents for months. But yours were rather different, weren't they? That it was a mixture of really hellish situations among some that were somewhat better. Tell us a bit about those.
Right. You're absolutely right. The first, I had another look this afternoon at the book and actually counted up the number of days. It wasn't as dire as it sounds, because there were only 19 days in lockdown. Sighs of envy all over Melbourne. But they were in 3 radically different places. The one in northern Jamaica, which was a 2-week, well, sorry, it must be more like 25 days. I can't do maths. 2-week lockdown, or 10 days effectively in northern Jamaica, was in a sanatorium hotel setting where there was room service and I could go out on the balcony without anybody saying I was being a naughty boy. But I was in my rooms for 2 weeks, and that was comparatively mild. The one in Dominica was really horrifying, because it was in a disused medical school where everybody had been bussed there. Some rooms had no toilet paper, others had no, the food service was irregular. We were billed for it anyway. And the worst aspect was it was right next to a stagnant pond of mosquito-ridden water in a country that had had far bigger outbreaks of Zika virus and dengue fever in the last few months than anything, than any COVID outbreak. So this was frightening. It got to the point where it looked as though we were being kept in quarantine in a far more dangerous situation to our health than any of us, who all had positive certificates coming into the country, could possibly pose to the rest of the population.
Which countries did you feel dealt with COVID best, and which were worst, do you think?
I would say that of those countries, I visited Grenada, was very efficient. It took a nasal swab at the airport. It required you to stay until the 24 hours later at your residence, until 24 hours later, and they were very efficient with getting the result to you. So I thought that was probably the best way, rather than just assume that because somebody had a perhaps a rapid test at the airport or a certificate days old, that they should be allowed to wander around. I found the most liberal, or the most lenient, perhaps the most lax, was actually Canada. When I got back to Canada from the Caribbean, and I presented a document saying that I'd been in a very low COVID region, they just basically waved me through, which I was surprised at, because Canada had quite a high level of COVID itself, dwarfed by the United States, but high enough. And it was also, I have to say, Dominican Republic, this is in July last year, was almost, apart from a curfew, there was no indoor mask wearing, there was no testing at the airport. It was basically, they took, you were greeted by health professionals, and you wrote down where you had been, then they stamped the passport and you were out to the taxi. So it was a very, very surprisingly free, laissez-faire system there.
Now, before I hand over to Meg, can you just give us a couple of your most memorable adventures, the most memorable people, positive or negative?
Right. I had a feeling you might ask that. I would say the most, one of the great positive stories, I don't want to mispronounce his name, so I wrote it down, was meeting Camilo Rijo Fulcar. Now, he is a Spanish classical guitarist, a busker in the center of Santo Domingo. As a young fellow who dresses in scruffy jeans and plays most beautiful Spanish guitar. And he's also well known for helping the street kids. He gives music tuition to the street kids there, and is also in a grunge band called, I translate from the Spanish, Cerebral Gangrene. It's a grunge band, so it has to have a shocking name. And he, it turns out, is a cancer survivor. He's all of 27 years of age, nearly died of cancer in New York, and is just one of those people who gives and gives and gives, and is well known in the community. Although you would look at him and never know his story, it was local restaurateurs and other people who said, oh, you know, this guy is done. And so I did meet him, and then heard more and more about him. The probably most scary adventure, or one of them, was that when I'm being forced to leave Cuba because all foreigners had to, I ended up in Fort Lauderdale in Florida. And I was wandering downtown one day, and I took a shortcut across a hospital, and I was caught short. So I saw this, I was actually directed by one of the guards to use a mobile toilet, which was just sitting a few meters away. So I headed up the ramp, I used that, and I'd forgotten to pick up this huge sun hat that I was wearing, and I left it in the, you know, in the facility. And I only realized later, 2 or 3 hours later, that, oh, where did I leave that? And I realized, and I came back through the hospital after visiting town, and just as I was heading up the ramp to see if by some miracle it was still there, this nurse sitting outside, senior nurse, matron type, sitting outside the annex field hospital, which had been put up next to the major one, said, you can't go there. And I said, but why not? I was here earlier. She said, that's for the COVID patients. Oh, yes. So for the next and the hat was missing as well. I mean, my luck was really out. So for the next 4 or 5 days, I just I was in my motel room at that point in Florida, thinking, praying, please, don't come down with a cough, because if I go back to the hospital next time, I won't be going to the toilet. Well, I will. I'll be going to the annex and then to the toilet, but still. And fortunately, because I had touched the surfaces that they must have touched, I felt that there was a risk. It just shows you how little I know about the epidemiology, doesn't it? But it really was a scary time.
I'll hand over to Meg, who'll take up some of these scary experiences.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm surprised, really, Ken, that you nominate that as the most scary experience, because without wanting to give any spoilers, you know, the book ends with you in hospital, desperately ill. You know, certainly having read that, I don't really doubt that that was the most frightening time, rather than
losing a hat.
Yes. And Ken, I've got to pick you up on one thing. You say that you didn't really realise what was coming, and of course none of us knew in February last year quite what was coming, but I distinctly remembering asking you, do you really want to go, Ken? Do you think this is a good thing to do?
It just shows you that people who are determined to do something will forget exactly what their mindset was. And what did I say?
You said, yes, of course, it'll be fine. But I think this brings us to the central question I want to ask you, Ken. You described yourself thinking of yourself as a traveller first and foremost, rather than as a man in a wheelchair. Yes. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a traveller, and why are you a traveller?
Right. This, you will find it difficult to believe also, is something I find hard to put into words. That's what you'll find difficult to believe. So let me think about it. I do love travel because maybe I inherit this very much from my late mum. I am essentially an observer. I'm a people watcher. And if I to me, the ideal form of existence, or for large parts of the day, would be to sit at a coffee table with my head, yes, buried in a book. I have been seen doing that too. But also looking at the at people living their lives and passing by, listening to snatches of conversation as well. So basically just zoning out from my concerns and my worries and being an observer. Now, that I also attribute to my choice of vocation as a journalist, to the very same love of watching what other people are doing. One can psychoanalyze that greatly and say, well, you don't reflect very much on your own life while you're doing that, do you? Yes, maybe that's a very wonderful reason that I do it. But it's also something that I found many years ago while traveling, that I could not, or I did not, whether I could not, but after a day's full experience, and the way I travel is not just observant, I will say that I do plan inordinately. I'd like to know that if I may not be passing this way again, at least I made the most of the day and saw as much as I could of the museums, the sporting events, if there are any, or anything else that was going on. I want to be very sure that I've had as immersive an experience as is possible to have. At the end of the day, what do I do with this head full of experience and activity and observations is write it down. And I used to keep very neat copperplate notes. The only time in my life I ever did write neatly, certainly not at school. I remember being told that.
Interrupt you there, Ken. Just
Go
ask
ahead.
another question.
Yes, sorry.
So obviously one of the things that we've all wrestled with in Melbourne over the last couple of years is the laws and imposing on our freedoms. And I was really struck, I think it was in Jamaica, where you realised you were going to have to quarantine, and you tried to work out how you could see as much of the place as possible within 15 days when you had to do 14 days of quarantine.
Yes.
And you book a hotel that's going to take you several days to get to.
Yes. Well, that's true. Now, the evening, I had returned from Antigua, which was the first Caribbean country to reopen, and I had 1 week there. And when I returned, I had, they changed the rules within that week. And this was a constant, I hope it comes through in the book, that whatever plans you make, and I had to make many, 15 changes of itinerary, governments were also very active. Cabinets were meeting every week, and not just in Australia, and they kept changing the rules. So when I got back to Florida for 1 day, I saw that the place I was going to stay in was no longer opening. And that the owners who had said, oh, well, don't worry, we don't have a system of quarantine here. That was true on the 15th of June, but not by the 24th. And there was a list of choices. Well, I thought, now, if I choose Montego Bay, first of all, many of them were very high end. Jamaica tried to make it a reclamation
hotels,
of
a list of hotels.
Exactly, hotels that I would never ordinarily stay at on price grounds alone. So I was going to choose what looked like the cheaper ones, did a bit of quick Googling. But then I thought, now, if it's in Montego Bay, well, that takes care of the first 14 days, and I have a flight out of Kingston on the 15th, and I will therefore I won't see any of the country. So I thought, no, the smart thing here to do is, and maybe not to choose Kingston, because maybe they'll, I'd be taking too long to get there and they'd hurry me out of the country anyway, but something halfway. So a little place at the brilliantly named Runaway Bay, where I did not run away, but I took my time slouching towards it, yes. And
given that you were negotiating legal restrictions all the time, and given that you're a traveller, as you've said so eloquently, what's your attitude to the restrictions? On the one hand, you would say you were very careful and mask wearing and so on.
Yes.
But you also seem to push the boundaries, if I can put it that way, as much as you could.
No, that's true. Well, I was trying to have a holiday And at the same time, I was going to, if there was a quarantine, I wasn't going to try not to be there. My attitude is it is a serious and deadly disease, and it would be foolish of me to take a Trumpian view of saying, well, it's a hoax, or it's not going to get me. I don't think of myself as invulnerable to disease. So I felt, but it's no good feeling, people who get it feel that they're not going to get it. I felt that if I took all the precautions, the sensible precautions, including social distancing, hand hygiene, etc., then followed the rules such as they were, but yes, pushed the boundaries on this one. How was I going to see those things? Well, there were enough places in northern Jamaica that I could see on the way to that nominated one. But to answer your question more directly, I was very upset, having followed the rules, taken 2 hours at the airport in Montego Bay, got the swabs and everything. They then promised to have the results within 24 hours. This was in June last year. What are we, 15, 16 months later? I'm still waiting for the results. They lost them. And 10 days later, I spoke to the regional director of the health office, and using old journalistic skills, I got her her mobile number. Actually, it was her secretary that gave it to me. And she said, how did you get my number? How did you get, of course, I protected the identity then, although that I've just blabbed out now. But the thing is that she was more concerned with her private number being exposed than following up and finding out what the result was. Because had they done their part of I look at it this way, you actually strike a bargain. You say, I will do the quarantine, I will do the test, you will give me the result, and if it's negative, I'm free to move. So I never intended to be so long in quarantine, and as it turned out, I was negative.
Ken, do you consider yourself a brave man?
No, I'm very stubborn. And to the extent that I'm fearless, it's that I exclude the rational risk that many others do see. So this is why, as a friend, you know this, I often need to be reminded of the danger that I'm putting myself in. I've got another good friend, Judy, told me on while I was waiting in Florida for countries to reopen, she gently but firmly suggested that the best course for me would be to come home. Mm. This probably strikes you as a very reasonable course, does it?
I was the one who told you not to go.
Well, yes, you and having gone, and do you regret that now?
No, because you don't. But
no, I don't. So right.
Stubborn
had it not worked out,
one of the words.
I thank you for your kind concern. There were other reasons apart from stubbornness. I had planned this journey. To get this journey planned involved so many moving parts, getting somebody to look after my flat, having actually negotiated an extension on the lease, which was uncertain up to very close to my departure point. And I have Lacandro, my real estate agent, in particular one person there, and he has to thank for the fact that I was able to get that moving part.
He is in the acknowledgements, I noted.
Yes, yeah, well, I am very grateful to him, because it's strange, isn't it, that somebody like myself, who is going off into a very uncertain part of the world, and certainly an uncertain world, should crave certainty back home. But then again, if I didn't have a home to come back to, I wouldn't feel confident enough to travel.
Hmm. Are your traveling days over, Ken?
No, I missed out on Central America. I still have, I want to go there when, I was going to say when it's safe, but why should I parrot these cliches when I don't really mean them? I do want to go to Central America when they reopen the borders, and South America as well. But it's not going to be this year or next year. If the book breaks big in America, Barry, hi. If the book breaks big in America, and I make $500,000, it will be next year. But I can't do it on my Melbourne Cup losings, because you can't do anything with losings. Yeah. So it will have to be more people buying the book.
So Ken, one of the questions I think that's probably going to occur to a lot of people is, you describe, I mean, you said that the worst things about being in a wheelchair were, you know, security and being first on and last off and all that sort of thing. But one of the things that strikes me reading it is the number of times in which you're staying in a hotel room where you actually need somebody to lift you down or lift you up, or in other ways give you, you know, mobility help just to be able to get into the room. And you describe bathrooms which aren't usable and all that sort of thing. And quite often, of course, people help you. And
well, that's true. Not so much in the rooms as on buses in particular.
Buses, lifting you up and down stairs. There's one incident where you get carried over a very long and rickety wooden jetty.
Oh, yes. Yes. I don't think the bus driver realised what was going to be involved. But yes, the jetty looked so rickety that it was being carried sedan-like over it with missing bars. They had to watch, you know, how they were going. Did I think I was in the wrong place? I don't know.
I was wondering, Ken, the point of my question is, I was wondering if you can reflect on the kindness of strangers,
but
also, absolutely. Of course, sometimes the brutality of strangers. You were mugged during this trip.
Yes, well, most people are kind if you let them. And sometimes there are times when I'm going along being my independent self, and I really resent when people open a door ostentatiously in front of me, and I think, don't they know I've got the use of my hands? And sometimes I've even been tetchy enough to tell them. But mostly when people are kind to you, I mean, when people go out of their way to help you because if they see you struggling, for instance, you're pushing up a hill, I'm not going to say no in that circumstance to help. It is most people are kind, and if you do ask them for help, say most, I really mean 95 to 98% in my experience, will help. Occasionally you'll find somebody, I was discussing this today with a friend in Munich. When I went to Munich, I'm in my chair and I come out of the railway station and I wanted to know where my the hostel that I was going to stay at, whether it was this street. And I saw this fellow and I said, is it Hilfigerstrasse? Or I think it was. And he looked at me and turned away. And now I don't judge all Austrians on his dismissive response. But I also reflect that it may not have been the wheelchair. It may well be that even though I was speaking German, my gosh, mein Gott, by mentioning the name of the street, maybe he just felt that it was, he doesn't talk to people who clearly aren't Müncheners. Maybe it had nothing to do with the wheelchair. It often doesn't. The mugging was so deftly carried out by a student of Fagin that I wasn't aware that Just remind us where the mugging was. Yeah, well, it's in St. Lucia. On my first night there, I'm coming back from the restaurant to the hostel. It is after dark, so there are factors there which show that I was really unwise to be out. But the sneak thief managed to filch my wallet from the depths of my backpack, where I've always prided myself on thinking, well, if somebody touches my backpack, I'll fill that and turn around. But he was extra good. And I didn't even realize it was gone until 10 or 15 minutes afterwards. So mugging is a little bit overstating it, but the effect was just as devastating. And the scariest. You up on local television on that, didn't you? Yeah, well, that's true. The police were useless. Really, they went on leave, literally went on leave for 3 days to pursue their investigations. So I decided the best thing is to bring a little bit of the media spotlight to bear. And so the TV people came down, did a cruise up and down the street, interviewed me and a lady there in the Starken Street who'd also been mugged 4 times. She lives there for 20 years. So she was mugged. And in the middle of, until eventually, I won't spoil anybody's reading pleasure by telling you how that works out in the end, but it got massive TV coverage, 30,000 hits in a country of 150,000 people. So yes, people were winding the windows down and saying, oh, you're the Australian who was robbed. Yes, I am. And in the middle of all this, back to Michelle's question about scary moments, I did turn around and get a glimpse of the thief, of the person who I later realized had robbed me. I meet him opposite a police station, or I sight him and I know it's him. And then I have to have a conversation which lets him know that there's a reward if he returns my wallet without accusing him of ever taking it.
Requires some subtlety, I think.
Oh,
Ken,
absolutely. It worked. But
Ken, can
yeah.
I ask how were you received as an Australian? Did you find in these countries that there was much perception of Australia?
Yes, I was surprised. I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, but I was surprised by how many people on hearing of Australia, oh, your bushfires, your terrible, your poor kangaroos. They had seen global coverage of the Black Summer bushfires, and although several people died, I did remind them of that. I did understand the way the media works, why their abiding image was of koalas being homeless and kangaroos being grassless.
Yes, well, we can all understand. I think we probably need to allow time for some questions from the audience, Ken. But
Okay.
one last one from me. What would you say you learnt from this trip?
Apart from choosing a better year to travel.
Listening to your friends, perhaps?
Oh yeah, yes, I can see that you yes, well, I will do more of that in future, Meg. Just keep bowling the advice up.
Yeah.
I learned that travel is worthwhile even in the most difficult circumstances, and I say that as a somebody who was discharged from hospital. My view might be different, obviously, if I was still there. And that every day in an unfamiliar environment is as rich as a month spent in your familiar surrounds. And the richness consists not only of rose petal strewn pathways that where nothing ever goes wrong, but of the full incident of life, which actually makes you feel, and this comes back to finally answer your earlier question, you feel super alive and super aware of the world in ways that most people rely on drugs to achieve, and that cannot really be emulated in the place you call home.
Well,
So was it a better book for being written after a year in the COVID country, or would it have been better without the COVID backdrop?
Now, speaking for my publisher, I have to say that it, and also as an author, I have to say that it is a richer book in terms of incident, and in that sense better, because it is also makes the journey distinctive. I have.
Well, it's a great read, Ken. It's a great read.
It is a great read.
I can't talk about its quality of, but I don't have to since you've just said that. But I do feel that I felt that I had more to work with. So thank you very much.
No, it's an extraordinary story of, well, Ken calls it stubbornness, I'll call it courage, and of
okay, if you insist.
Live to the full,
and surprise.
Yes, and maybe I was wrong to tell him not to go, because
no.
Amazing journey.
Well, you wouldn't be sitting here now if I'd listened, but on the other hand.
Anyway, we should probably, Christine, I think you're wondering questions, aren't you?
I am indeed. I've got a question here, Ken, from David. He wants to know, did you ever travel to Canada during the winter? And if so, how did you find getting around in snow?
I have traveled to Canada during winter, David. In fact, as an early chapter shows, I stopped off in Canada before heading down to the Caribbean. I have a friend in British Columbia with a young family, and we stopped off there. I stopped off there for a week, and we went out to a barbecue in sub-zero temperatures by a frozen lake in the Rockies. And it was -5, not the coldest I've ever been, but I got to say the beers do taste warmer at that temperature. but getting the fire going was quite an art. So yes, I've been to Canada in quite cold times. The wheelchair doesn't like sand. So when I say that I had a lot of beaches to myself, it is true, but I wasn't sitting there sunbaking. And it likes snow even less. So I just avoided, I mean, you can't travel very fast because the snow blocks up your wheels and turns to slush. This is, of course, my philosophy of life itself. And I just try to avoid snow if I can. But as people in Canada have learned, if there are people around to shovel enough of it away, you can get around in the wintertime, they have to, without it defeating your life. And watching snow, of course, is a beautiful thing, so long as you're not immobilized by it.
Many of your viewers have been watching your flag behind you, Ken,
yes.
and they want to know more about the flag, and they want to know why it's moving so beautifully.
It's moving so beautifully because I designed, I gave some thought to this and had the air conditioner put on so that it would simulate this. I was speaking with Neil Armstrong a few decades ago about how you're going to get the flag fluttering on the moon, and he used a similar idea, except the air conditioning doesn't work up there. This is the flag of Barbados, one of my favorite destinations in the Caribbean, and one of my what would you call it, souvenirs of the journey. So that is the flag of Barbados.
Thank you.
And I don't have any other flags, otherwise you know, there'd be no room for these books which have to be returned by 6:30. No, they are mine. Yes.
We've got time for one more question, and it's just coming through now. It's from Carol, and she says, were you writing parts of the book while traveling, and how did that work for you?
No, Carol, I wasn't. But as I discovered years ago that I would write when I had nothing else to do, I'm just fossicking around this for this. I always keep notes, and there we go. It's upside down. And always take notes. As I said to Michelle, I used to take them in copper plate. But as I'm approaching my 40s, I now, all right, maths wasn't my strong suit. I always, I scrawl now. So the important thing is that there's enough memory of the day, even if it's a couple of days later, that combined with the diaries that you keep, that I keep, and my own memory, there will be enough material to bring it back. Yeah. I began writing 6 days after coming out of hotel quarantine in Melbourne. How
was that, Ken? How was that hotel quarantine?
Look, it was okay. They kept on sending bottles of water to my room, even when I said I don't need so many. They would, with every meal, I got 7 bottles of water. So at the end of my 2 weeks, I had 72 bottles of water, which they would not take back, and which I wanted to haul away with me, because I thought, well, it's summertime, it's bound to get warm sometime. And and I was only able to carry 30 away. What a waste of bottled water. Mm. But they were friendly enough, and I did a lot more reading in lockdown, as I suppose a lot of people do. Sorry, in quarantine, as many people have done in lockdown. So yes, a beautiful thing about being a reader, Christine, as you know, is that you can never get bored, so long as you've got enough reading material.
On that perfect note, Ken, perfect, I'd like to thank, on behalf of Transit Lounge and Readings, Michelle and Margaret, for their astute questioning of your journey. And to you, Ken, thank you so much for being part of our program. And to all the listeners and watchers from all over the world, we are delighted to have you here at Readings Carlton, wedged as we are between the self-help and the poetry, and making our way over to the travel section so that we can see Ken's book in all its glory. Congratulations to you. Well done.
The book, everyone. It's a great read.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.